On October 12, 1943, at 23,000 feet above the Rhineland, a B-17 Flying Fortress, tail number 42 to 3067, bucked violently as a 20mm cannon shell ripped through its number 3 engine. Thick black smoke billowed from the cowling. Inside the cockpit, First Lieutenant Robert Hayes felt the control yoke shudder in his grip as the aircraft's nose dropped 15 degrees. Behind him, in the radio room, Sergeant Mike Donnelly watched hydraulic fluid spray across the fuselage wall like blood from a severed artery. The Fortress was dying, and they were still 140 miles from England. Above and off to the right, First Lieutenant James Howell saw the strike. His P-47 Thunderbolt, bearing the name Jersey Thunder stenciled beneath the cockpit, rolled hard to keep the crippled bomber in sight. Howell was 24 years old, a farm boy from New Jersey who had logged 312 combat hours over Europe and flown 72 missions. He knew exactly what happened to stragglers. The bomber formation drove on without hesitation, following standard procedure. One damaged aircraft could not endanger the entire group. Hayes understood this. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Frank Morrison, was already running the numbers in his head: 3 engines, maximum speed maybe 160 indicated, altitude bleeding away at 200 feet per minute, German fighters circling like sharks. Howell keyed his radio. "Big friend, this is Jersey 27. I have you visual. Stay with me." Hayes's reply crackled back, tight and controlled. "Jersey, we're losing hydraulics. Number 3 is on fire. Can't hold altitude." "Copy that, big friend. I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise Howell had no authority to make. His fuel gauge showed 58 minutes remaining, possibly less depending on throttle settings. The bomber was limping along at 140 knots. England lay 90 miles to the northwest. The math favored no one. The mission had begun 6 hours earlier at Thorpe Abbotts, home of the 100th Bomb Group. Hayes and his crew were flying their 19th mission, a daylight precision strike against the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Intelligence had promised light opposition. Intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. 320 B-17s had crossed the channel that morning. The Luftwaffe met them with more than 400 fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, rising in swarms from a dozen airfields. The sky turned into a slaughterhouse. Bombers fell in flames, spiraling earthward, trailing wreckage and men. The P-47 escorts fought desperately, but their range was limited. At the German border, they peeled away, fuel tanks nearly dry. Hayes's bomber took its first hit during the bomb run. Flak burst beneath the aircraft, shrapnel punching through the thin aluminum skin. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant Eddie Martinez, took fragments in his left shoulder. The waist gunner, Corporal Tommy Briggs, was knocked unconscious when a chunk of metal slammed into his helmet, denting it without penetrating. Then came the fighters. 4 FW-190s dove in from 11 o'clock high, wings flashing with cannon fire. The top turret gunner, Sergeant Paul Richter, poured .50 caliber rounds into the lead aircraft. Tracers formed a deadly arc. The Focke-Wulf exploded in midair, breaking apart into tumbling debris. The remaining 3 pressed the attack. That was when the number 3 engine failed. Now, 15 minutes after leaving the target area, Hayes fought to keep the aircraft level as the Fortress sank through 22,000 feet. Morrison worked frantically to restart the damaged engine, but the propeller windmilled uselessly. Worse still, the hydraulics were failing. Without pressure, the gun turrets could not rotate. The bomb bay doors hung partly open, adding drag. "Skipper," Morrison said quietly, "we should tell them to bail out." Hayes did not answer right away. Below them stretched the patchwork fields of occupied France, deep in German territory. Men who bailed out became prisoners of war if they survived the fall. Resistance fighters sometimes helped down airmen escape, but the odds were poor, and Martinez was wounded. Could he even jump with a shredded shoulder? Not yet, Hayes said. Above them, Howell swept the sky. His 8.50 caliber machine guns were loaded and ready. The Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds, enough for roughly 34 seconds of continuous fire. He had already burned through 600 rounds in an earlier fight. That left 28 seconds, maybe movement at 2 o'clock. Howell's head snapped right. 3 Bf-109s painted in splinter camouflage approached from the south. They'd spotted the wounded bomber. Stragglers were easy kills, and the Luftwaffe pilots knew it. Howell didn't hesitate. He advanced the throttle and banked hard, positioning himself between the bombers and the fighters. The P-47's Pratt and Whitney R-2800 engine roared, all 2,000 horsepower driving him forward. The Thunderbolt accelerated to 300 knots. The lead message saw him coming and broke left. Too late. Howell lined up the shot and pressed the trigger. All 8 guns erupted simultaneously. The recoil slowed the aircraft perceptibly. Spent shell casings streamed from the wings. Tracer rounds converged on the 109's fuselage. Hits, solid hits. The German fighter canopy shattered. Pieces of metal tore away from the cowling. White glycol coolant sprayed from the radiator. The Messers rolled inverted and fell away, trailing smoke. The other two 109 scattered, climbing for altitude. They'd expected an easy kill. Instead, they'd found a P-47 flown by someone who knew what he was doing. The Germans regrouped at 25,000 feet, weighing their options. Inside the bomber, the crew heard Howell's guns and understood someone was protecting them. Jersey, thanks for the save, Haste transmitted. But you're burning fuel. You should head home. Negative, big friend. You've got company all the way to the fence. The fence, fighter pilot slang for the English Channel, 90 m away, at 140 knots. Ground speed, that meant 38 minutes. Howell checked his fuel gauge again. 42 minutes remaining. It would be close. Dangerously close. The bomber continued descending. 20,000 feet, 19,000. Hayes fought to slow the descent rate. But physics ruled here. 3 engines couldn't maintain altitude with combat damage and partially open bomb bay doors. The aircraft was a flying brick. At 18,000 feet, the bomber passed through a thin cloud layer. For 30 seconds, they flew blind, instrument references only. When they emerged into clear air, Howell immediately spotted trouble. 5 more fighters, Bf 109s in a Vic formation, approaching from 12 o'clock level. The Germans had radioed for reinforcements. This was becoming a coordinated attack. Howell positioned himself head-on to the enemy formation. It was a tactic that required nerves of steel. 2 aircraft hurtling toward each other at a combined closing speed of over 500 knots. The German pilots saw the lone P-47 and hesitated. 1 fighter against 5 should be easy. But this pilot had already killed one of their comrades and damaged another. At 3,000 yards, Howell opened fire. Long-range shooting, usually ineffective, but he wasn't trying to score kills. He was disrupting their formation, making them flinch, protecting the bomber behind him. Tracer fire lanced through the sky. The lead measures broke right. The formation scattered. Howell dove under them, rolled inverted, and came up firing at the trailing 109. More hits. The German aircraft shuddered and banked away, streaming smoke from its engine. But the fight wasn't over. 2 Messerschmitts circled around, attempting to attack the bomber from the rear. Hayes' tail gunner, Sergeant Walt Kendrick, fired a burst from his twin 50s, but the guns jammed. After 4 rounds, Kendrick swore and frantically worked to clear the jam. Howell saw the threat developing. He horsed around in a brutal high G-turn, vision graying at the edges from the acceleration. The P-47 wasn't known for maneuverability, but Howell had learned to make the big fighter dance. He closed to 600 yards on the nearest 109 and fired. The German pilot never saw it coming. 20 cannon shells and 50 caliber bullets stitched across the Messerschmitts wing route. The wing folded upward, torn away by aerodynamic forces. The fighter tumbled end over end and disappeared into the clouds below. The remaining German fighters broke off the attack and fled eastward. 3 aircraft lost or damaged in 5 minutes. The price was too high. Silence, relative silence anyway. The rumble of engines and the whistle of wind through damaged metal. Hayes allowed himself one deep breath. Jersey 27, you just saved our lives. Howell didn't respond immediately. He was checking his fuel gauge. 28 minutes remaining. The channel was still 65 miles away and the bomber was down to 16,000 foot, still descending. Morrison looked at Hayes. We're not going to make it, are we? Hayes studied the instruments. Altitude, airspeed, fuel remaining in tanks 1 and 2, oil pressure on the 3 functioning engines, everything told the same story. The numbers didn't lie. We'll make it to the channel, Hay said. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. After that, they ditch in the freezing water and hope the RAF rescue launches found them before hypothermia set in. Survival time in October. North sea water was approximately 20 minutes. Above them, Howell faced his own calculations. His fuel gauge now showed 23 minutes. The bomber was 58 miles from the English coast at current speed. That meant 24 minutes of flight time. He'd run out of fuel 1 minute before the bomber reached safety. Howell made his decision. He pulled the throttle back to minimum cruise setting, leaned the fuel mixture to maximum economy, and adjusted his propeller pitch for maximum efficiency. Every trick he knew to stretch fuel endurance. Maybe, just maybe, he could squeeze out 2 more minutes. Below and ahead, the French countryside rolled past small villages, farm fields, roads where German trucks moved supplies toward the front. Enemy territory all the way to the water. The bomber descended through 15,000 feet. The number 3 engine's fire had gone out. Nothing left to burn but the drag from the windmilling propeller and damaged cowling was enormous. Hayes trimmed the aircraft as best he could, but every control input felt sluggish. The hydraulics were nearly gone. 13,000 feet. Howell stayed close, weaving above and behind the bomber in a protective S pattern. His eyes never stopped moving. Scan the sky, check the fuel, scan again. Every German fighter pilot in northern France probably knew about the crippled bomber by now, and they were coming 12,000 feet. The bomber punched through another layer of clouds. When they emerged, Morrison spotted them. First fighters 10 o'clock high. 4, no. 6 contacts. Hayes felt his stomach tighten. 6 Bf-109s in a perfect attack formation, diving from 17,000 feet. The Germans had assembled a hunting pack specifically for this kill. No more probing attacks. This was a coordinated strike meant to finish the job. Howell saw them simultaneously. 6 against 1. The Thunderbolt carried enough ammunition for maybe 20 seconds of fire. He'd have to make every burst count. He pushed the throttle forward, fuel economy be damned, and climbed to meet them. The P-47 accelerated upward, engines screaming. Howell selected the lead fighter and opened fire at 1,200 yards. Too far for accurate shooting, but again he wasn't hunting kills. He was disrupting the attack geometry. The lead measures broke formation to avoid the tracers. The precise attack pattern collapsed into chaos. 2 fighters veered left, 2 went right, 2 continued straight. Howell singled out the rightmost 109 and closed to 400 yards. He pressed the trigger. The 850s hammered. The Messerschmitt's tail section disintegrated under the impact. The aircraft pitched up violently, stalled, and fell away spinning. But the other 5 were now attacking from multiple vectors. Howell couldn't cover all approaches simultaneously. 2 109s dove on the bomber from 7 o'clock high, cannon fire sparkling from their wings. Inside the bomber, tail gunner Kendrick had finally cleared his gun jam. He swung the twin 50s onto target and fired. 50 caliber rounds ripped into the lead attacker's engine. White smoke erupted from the cowl. The measures pulled up sharply and broke away, but the second fighter pressed the attack. 20mm cannon shells walked across the bomber's left wing, punching through aluminum skin. One shell exploded in the number 2 fuel tank. The tank was nearly empty. They'd burned most of their fuel getting to the target, but residual vapors ignited. Flames erupted from the wing. Fire in number 2. Morrison shouted. He reached for the engine fire suppression controls and pulled the handle. CO2 flooded the engine compartment. The flames flickered and died. But the damage was done. Number 2 engine was destroyed. The propeller seized, frozen in place. The bomber now flew on 2 engines. 2 engines out of 4. Altitude dropped. Through 11,000 feet, Hayes fought the controls, trying to maintain even a shallow descent rate, but the aircraft wanted to roll left. The weight of the dead engines created an asymmetric drag profile. Skipper, we gotta bail, Morrison said louder this time. Hayes shook his head. Not yet, Jersey still with us, and he was. Howell had engaged the remaining fighters in a savage dog fight at 10,000 feet. The Thunderbolt's rugged construction saved his life. Twice cannon shells struck his aircraft, but failed to penetrate the armor plating behind the cockpit. 1 round tore through the left wing, missing the fuel tank by 18 inches. Howell destroyed one more Misasmid, a deflection shot from impossible angles that caught the German pilot completely by surprise. The 109 exploded midair, a brief orange fireball that left a black smudge across the sky. The remaining 3 German fighters finally broke off. They'd lost 3 aircraft trying to kill this one bomber. Their fuel was low. The engagement wasn't worth it anymore. Howell rejoined the bomber, now descending through 9,000 feet. His fuel gauge showed 11 minutes remaining. The English Channel was 42 miles ahead. At the bomber's current speed, that meant 18 minutes of flight time, 7 minutes short. Howell heeded the radio. Big friend, I'm going to have to leave you soon. Fuel state critical. There was a long pause before Hayes responded. Understood. Jersey, you've already done more than anyone could ask. Get yourself home. Negative. I'll stay with you as long as I can. In the bomber's cockpit, Morrison leaned toward Hayes. He's going to crash, trying to save us. Hayes knew it was true. The math was simple and unforgiving. If the P-47 pilot stayed with them all the way to the channel, he'd run out of fuel over enemy territory. He'd have to bail out or crash land. Either way, he'd become a prisoner of war. 8,000 feet. The bomber's descent rate had accelerated to 300 feet per minute. At this rate, they'd be at wavetop level before reaching the coast. If they had to ditch, the impact would tear the aircraft apart. Survival odds in a water landing, maybe 30%. And that was in calm seas with a functional aircraft. This bomber was barely holding together. In the radio room, Donnelly used his remaining hydraulic pressure to manually crank down the landing gear. It was a precaution. If they made it to England, they'd need wheels for landing. But with 2 engines gone and battle damage throughout the airframe, even a wheels down landing would be marginal at best. 7,000 feet. The French coast appeared on the horizon. Beyond it, 35 miles of cold gray water. Beyond that, England. Safety, home. Howell's fuel gauge touched the red line. 8 minutes remaining, maybe less. The gauge wasn't perfectly accurate at low fuel states, Below them, the coastal town of Dep passed underneath. German anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Black puffs of flak burst around the bomber. Hayes jinked left, then right, trying to spoil the gunner's aim. One shell detonated close enough to rock the aircraft. Shrapnel peppered the fuselage. In the waist gun position, Corporal Briggs, now conscious again after being knocked out earlier, felt something warm running down his leg. He looked down. Blood. A piece of shrapnel had caught him in the thigh. Not serious, but it hurt like hell. Waist. Gunner hit. Someone shouted over the intercom. How bad? Hayes demanded. Not bad, skipper. I can still walk. 6,000 foot. They crossed the coastline and flew out over the channel. The water below looked dark and uninviting. Surface, moderate seas, white caps visible. Water temperature approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time 20 minutes before hypothermia set in. Howell checked his fuel gauge one more time. 5 minutes. The English coast was still 28 miles away. He'd run dry 12 miles short of land. He made his decision. Big friend, I'm heading for the deck, going to set her down in the water close to you. When you ditch, we'll be in the same area. Better chance for rescue that way. Hayes understood immediately what Howell was planning. Instead of turning back and trying to reach French territory where he might crash land and survive as the P-47 pilot was choosing to ditch in the channel alongside them. He'd risk death to stay with them until the end. Jersey. Negative. You can still make it back to France. You'll survive as a prisoner. Not leaving you, big friend. We're going home together or not at all. Inside the bomber, the crew heard this exchange over the intercom. 10 men who'd accepted their probable death suddenly had hope. Again, someone was staying with them. They weren't alone. 5,000 feet. Howell descended alongside the bomber, matching their rate of descent. His fuel gauge showed 3 minutes. The engine would quit soon. When it did, he'd have perhaps 90 seconds of gliding flight before hitting the water. 4,000 feet. Hayes scanned the horizon desperately. Nothing. No rescue boats, no ships, just empty ocean. 3,000 foot. Howell's engine coughed once. The first sign of fuel starvation. He switched fuel tanks, hoping to squeeze out another 30 seconds from residual fuel in the lines. 2,000 feet. Hayes began his ditching checklist. Morrison read off items. His voice mechanical, detached, professional to the end. Crew, prepare for water. Landing, assume crash positions. Impact, in 90 seconds. In the tail section, Kendrick strapped himself in tight. In the radio room, Donnelly braced against the bulkhead. In the waist, Briggs and the other gunners wedged themselves between equipment racks. In the ball turret, Martinez had rotated his position to the horizontal position and was trying to climb out. The ball turret would be a death trap in a water landing. 1,000 feet. Howell's engine coughed again, longer this time. The propeller windmilled for 2 seconds before power resumed. Hayes lined up into the wind, trying to minimize ground speed at impact. The bomber descended through 800 feet, 700, 600. Howell's engine quit. The sudden silence was shocking. The Pratt Whitney R2800 that had roared for the past 3 hours simply stopped. The propeller kept windmilling, but it was producing no power. The P-47 became a glider, an 8-ton glider with terrible glide characteristics. Howell immediately pushed the nose down to preserve airspeed. He would need speed for the landing. Too slow and the aircraft would stall and cartwheel across the water. Too fast and the impact would rip the wings off. 400 feet. Hayes pulled back on the yoke, flaring the bomber. The aircraft's nose rose and the airspeed bled away. 120 knots, 110, 100. The bomber struck the water. The impact was catastrophic. The fuselage slammed into the wavetops and the entire airframe flexed like a living thing. Rivets burst free, seams tore open, and water erupted upward in towering plumes. The bomber skipped once, then twice, then settled onto the surface and began sliding forward in a roaring curtain of spray. Inside, the crew was hurled forward against their restraints. Equipment broke loose and became flying debris. The bombardier, Lieutenant Carl Vickers, felt his shoulder dislocate as he smashed into the instrument panel. Martinez, still climbing out of the ball turret, was crushed when the turret collapsed on impact. The aircraft slid for 300 yards before finally grinding to a stop. Water immediately began rushing in through 100 cracks and holes. "Everybody out, now!" Hayes shouted. The crew scrambled for exits, the top hatch, the waist gun windows, the nose hatch. Morrison kicked open the escape hatch above his seat and dragged Hayes toward it. "Come on, skipper." They spilled out onto the wing. The bomber was already settling, listing to the left as water poured through the shattered sections. The aircraft had maybe 2 minutes before it went under. 200 yards away, Howell was fighting for his own life. The P-47 hit the water nose first at 90 knots. The engine, weighing more than 2,000 pounds, drove downward like an anchor. The aircraft flipped forward and Howell was slammed into the instrument panel. His head struck the gun sight and blood ran into his eyes. Water flooded the cockpit, cold, shockingly cold. Howell gasped and fumbled for the canopy release. His hands were numb. Everything was numb. He pulled the emergency handle and the canopy blew free. Water surged in. Howell forced himself up and out, battling the weight of his flight gear and parachute. The aircraft was sinking fast, dragging him down. He tore himself free just as the tail vanished beneath the surface. He broke the surface, choking for air, and saw the bomber 400 yards away. Men were leaping from the wings into the water. Orange life rafts blossomed open. At least some of the emergency gear had worked. Howell inflated his Mae West life vest and started swimming toward the bomber. Every stroke was torture. The cold drained his strength. His flight boots felt like lead. He reached the nearest raft and hands hauled him aboard. Hayes's face appeared above him. "Jersey, you crazy bastard. You actually did it." Howell couldn't answer. He was shaking too violently from the cold. Someone threw a blanket over him. They counted heads. 8 men in the first raft, 3 in the second, 11 total. There should have been 10 bomber crewmen and 1 fighter pilot. That was 11. Everyone had survived the landing. Then someone realized one man was missing. "Where's Martinez?" Hayes demanded. Silence followed. Then Donnelly spoke quietly. "He didn't make it out, skipper." The ball turret. Hayes closed his eyes. 9 saved, 1 lost. The arithmetic of war. They drifted in the frigid channel water for 18 minutes before an RAF rescue launch spotted them. 18 minutes that felt like hours. Men whispered prayers. Some cried. Others simply stared at the gray sky. When the British boat pulled alongside and began lifting them aboard, Hayes made sure Howell went first. "This man," Hayes told the British sailors, "stayed with us for 90 miles, fought off 20 enemy fighters, ran out of fuel, and ditched alongside us. He saved 9 lives today." The British captain looked at Howell, soaked and shivering uncontrollably, and nodded. "Well done, Yank. Well done indeed." 3 days later, Howell received the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in combat against enemy forces." Hayes and his crew attended the ceremony. They stood at attention and saluted as the medal was pinned to Howell's chest. Years after the war, Hayes was asked about that day. He said, "We were dead. We knew it. Everyone knew it. Then this pilot in a P-47 decided we weren't dying that day. He stayed when he should have left. He fought for us when the odds were impossible. He ditched in the ocean rather than abandon us. That's not courage. That's something beyond courage. I don't have a word for it." James Howell returned to civilian life after the war and rarely spoke about his combat service. When people asked about the medal, he changed the subject. But the men of that B-17 crew never forgot. Every year until his death in 1998, Howell received Christmas cards from the families of the men he had saved. 9 lives, 90 miles, one decision that defined what it meant to be a warrior. The men who flew these missions understood sacrifice in ways most of us never will. They flew into fire because someone had to. They stayed when they should have fled because brothers do not abandon brothers. If this story moved you, honor their memory by subscribing to this channel. Share these stories with family and friends so these acts of heroism are never forgotten. Next time, we'll tell you about the B-24 pilot who landed his burning bomber to save his trapped crew. Until then, remember,